Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today we're plunging into a truly powerful and, at times, quite heartbreaking stack of sources. The book, War Against All Puerto Ricans, Revolution and Terror in America's Colony by Nelson A. Denis.
It's really not just a history book, is it?
No, exactly. It's this meticulously researched narrative, drawing from, FBI files, personal interviews, historical documents. It really unearths a hidden history.
A very hidden history.
Right. So our mission today is to unpack this complex, often brutal relationship between the United States and Puerto Rico. We'll focus on the independence movement, U.S. surveillance, and really the experiences of the Puerto Rican people and their leaders.
People like Pedro Albizu Campos, Luis Muñoz Marin, key figures.
Absolutely. You'll hear stories of extraordinary resilience, some shocking betrayals, and even secret medical experiments. This deep dive, it's designed to give you a shortcut to understanding a crucial, often overlooked chapter in American history.
And what's truly fascinating here, I think, is how this dive reveals that history isn't always what's in the official narratives, not by a long shot. We'll be exploring a perspective that's largely been unheard for maybe 100 years, bringing to light events that were often hidden or misrepresented or just ignored.
It's not just dates and names, then.
No, definitely not. It's about understanding the human cost of these power dynamics and how they shaped a whole nation.
Okay, so let's start at the beginning. 1898. The U.S. arrives in Puerto Rico. They claim they were bringing protection, enlightened civilization. But what did our sources reveal about reality, on the ground?
Well, the initial U.S. perspective, you see it in places like the New York Times, statements from Theodore Roosevelt, Senator Henry Cabot Lodge. They viewed Puerto Rico mostly for its commercial value.
Oh, so strategic value, too.
Exactly. Its commanding position between two continents. Basically, an island well worth having. And this was framed through a lens of, frankly, racial superiority. Senator Albert J. Beveridge proclaimed this divine plan for English-speaking and Teutonic peoples to govern savages and senile peoples.
Wow, that's direct.
It is. And the New York Times even described Puerto Ricans as, and this is a quote, uneducated, simple-minded, and harmless people who are only interested in wine, women, music, and dancing.
That's quite a perception to start with. So with that kind of mindset, how did this enlightened civilization actually, manifest? What did the occupation look like?
Well, immediately there was this systematic, pretty forceful attempt at Americanization.
How so?
Consider this. Within just 10 years of occupation, every subject in public schools was taught in English. All textbooks were in English.
Even if the kids didn't speak it, or the teachers.
Right. Most students and many teachers didn't understand the language. Then the Official Language Act of 1902 declared English a co-equal language in government. And by 1909, speaking Spanish in public schools was actually forbidden.
Forbidden.
Imagine being a child like Luis Muñoz Marin, who we'll talk more about later. He'd spent time in New York, knew more English than his classmates back in Puerto Rico. And the source says he was hated for it.
So it was a direct assault on their culture.
A direct top-down assault on 400 years of language and culture, yeah.
And beyond culture, what about economically? How did this protection play out there?
Well, the U.S. fundamentally changed the island's economy. It used to be diversified, coffee, tobacco.
Right.
They turned it into a one-crop cash cow, sugar.
Sugar. Yeah.
And Charles Herbert Allen, the first civilian governor, he basically leveraged his governorship into a controlling interest in the entire island's sugar economy through the American sugar refining company Domino Sugar.
The governor himself.
Yes. The concentration of power was, well, staggering. And meanwhile, things like a minimum wage law were declared unconstitutional by the U.S. Supreme Court. Plus, U.S. finished products cost 15 to 20% more on the island.
So people were earning less and paying more.
Exactly. You had people like Julio Feliciano Colon, a sugar cane cutter, making maybe $4 a week, often cheated at the company stores too, his mother. 50 cents a week for needlework.
It sounds less like protection and more like exploitation.
The source paints a picture of a deliberate transformation, essentially turning the island into a corporate asset, disempowering its people.
It really makes you question that promise of civilization. So given that, what kind of people were actually appointed as governors? Were they focused on development?
The pattern of appointments is interesting, let's say. E. Montgomery Riley, for instance, a former assistant postmaster, appointed governor in 1921. The source calls it a political payoff. He arrives, announces he's the boss now, says Puerto Rico must become a U.S. state, and vows it to fire anyone lacking Americanism.
Not exactly a diplomatic start.
No. And then he packed his administration with inexperienced buddies from Kansas City who didn't speak any Spanish. His arrogance was apparently so profound that the entire island nicknamed him Mancho Reyes, which is Caribbean slang for congenital idiot.
Chuckle slightly. Okay.
He was forced to resign in less than 2 years, caught with his hand in the till, basically.
And he wasn't the only one.
No. Later, General Blanton Winship, appointed by FDR to restore law and order, actually proposed reinstating the death penalty. He was described by people at the time as the most disastrous governor that Puerto Rico has had in this century.
So less about development, more about control and maybe cronyism?
It certainly looks that way based on these examples. Political patronage seems key.
Okay, so with this backdrop, economic exploitation, cultural suppression, questionable leaders, it's hardly surprising a strong independence movement started to grow. And this brings us to a really pivotal figure in our deep dive. Pedro Albizu Campos. Tell us about him.
Albizu Campos was truly exceptional, born out of wedlock, which was a significant barrier then. But he became the first Puerto Rican to graduate from Harvard College and Harvard Law School, spoke 6 languages, served as a first lieutenant in World War I.
That's quite a resume.
It is. And he even helped Eamon de Valera, the Irish leader, draft the Constitution of the Free State of Ireland. He was deeply influenced by Ireland's struggle against British colonialism.
Oh, so he saw parallels.
Yeah, clearly. At Harvard, he was voted president of the Cosmopolitan Club, which was a big deal, known for intellectual debate, widely respected for his intellect, his work ethic.
So this highly educated, influential figure connected to global independence movements. How did he become the face of the Nationalist Party in Puerto Rico?
He became known very quickly for his passionate advocacy for independence. He'd do things like remove miniature American flags from podiums before speaking, campaigned all over Central America, exposing how U.S. banks and companies were, controlling Puerto Rico.
And the party grew.
It grew rapidly. The Nationalist Party had a youth branch, the Cadets of the Republic. They trained with wooden rifles, but it was serious. By 1936, the source says over 10,000 cadets were drilling across the island. Momentum was building.
But this kind of growing movement, it wasn't met with open arms, was it? The sources describe pretty harsh opposition.
Oh, absolutely brutal opposition. The insular police, who reported directly to the governor, not local authorities, they engaged in systematic suppression.
Right.
Well, in February 1936, 4 nationalists were gunned down in what became known as the Rio Piedras Massacre. One of them, Juan Munoz Jimenez, was apparently just out buying a lottery ticket. And the police chief at the time, E. Francis Riggs, who came from the wealthy Riggs National Bank family, he famously declared he was ready to wage war to the death against all Puerto Ricans.
Much the days.
Or not just rhetoric, right? It signals a clear intent to crush any dissent violently if necessary.
And this leads us to one of the most, notorious events, the Ponce Massacre. What happened that day?
The Ponce Massacre. It was Palm Sunday, March 21st, 1937. The Nationalists had a permit for a parade, a peaceful one.
Right.
Governor Winship revoked it at the very last minute. Then, over 200 police officers, armed with submachine guns, rifles, surrounded the demonstrators, who were unarmed civilians.
Unarmed.
Unarmed. Men, women, children. The police opened fire. Just opened fire into the crowd. 17 people were killed, including a young cadet named Bolivar Marquez Telechea. The source says, just before dying, he managed to write in his own blood, "Long live the Republic, down with the murderers."
That's horrifying. And you mentioned a cover-up attempt.
Yes, the police chief, Enrique de Arbeda, actually staged live-action photos afterwards, trying to make it look like the police were returning fire from nationalist snipers that didn't exist.
Staged photos.
Yeah, the source describes them as cynical and obviously staged. One photo showed Orbeda and his men kind of neatly arranged around the corpse of another officer who was likely killed by friendly fire in the chaos.
But did it work? Did people buy it?
Thankfully, no. The island newspapers, they refused to be pressured. They had photographers there like Angela Braun Robles who saw everything. They ran photos of the bullet holes, published doctors' testimonies that many wounded had been shot in the back while fleeing.
So local press really pushed back.
They did. And the American Civil Liberties Union, the ACLU, led by Arthur Garfield Hayes, came down, did a 10-day investigation. Their formal conclusion, it was indeed the Ponce Massacre, and it arose directly from the police denying the citizens civil rights.
What happened to Winship?
Governor Winship eventually lost his governorship in 1939, partly due to this, but the impact, the meaning of the massacre that was never lost on the people. Over 20,000 attended the funerals. It absolutely galvanized the independence movement.
A real turning point then, but achieved at such a terrible cost.
A terrible cost, yes.
Now, one of the most, frankly, shocking parts of this deep dive is the scale of U.S. surveillance revealed in the source. Let's talk about the carpetas. What were these?
Carpetas. Yeah, these were secret FBI dossiers kept on Puerto Ricans for over 60 years.
60 years?
60 years. Just on Albizu Campos alone, there are 1.8 million pages of files.
1.8 million.
Million. And over 100,000 Puerto Ricans in total, most completely unaware, had these files. They contain incredibly intimate details.
Like what kind of details?
Everything. Surveillance notes, telephone taps, bank accounts, medical records, even things labeled sexual profiles, and just neighborhood gossip.
That's deeply intrusive, more than just political surveillance.
Oh, much more. It wasn't just data collection. It was a psychological weapon, designed to sow fear, control people, destroy careers. It reached into the most private parts of life. The author, Denis, he writes about his own anger, discovering these, seeing parallels to his father's deportation during the Cuban Missile Crisis based on some unsubstantiated accusation.
So these weren't just sitting in a file cabinet. They were used. How did they integrate with actual laws to suppress the movement?
Precisely. They were active instruments of control. In 1948, Puerto Rico passed Public Law 53. It became known as La Ley de la Mordaza, the gag law.
The gag law? What did it do?
It made it a felony, a serious crime to own or display a Puerto Rican flag.
Just displaying the flag?
Yes. Or to speak in favor of independence. Or to print or publish anything seen as undermining the government. It basically gave police and the FBI free rein to stop anyone, invade homes without warrants, based on suspicion.
That's incredibly broad, devastating for civil liberties.
Absolutely devastating.
And who was in charge when this draconian law was passed? This brings us back to Luis Muñoz Marin, Puerto Rico's first elected governor. How does his story connect?
Right, Muñoz Marin. His life, as the source details it, was really complex. As a young man, described as a rake's progress, dabbled in poetry, struggled financially, lived a bohemian life in Greenwich Village.
Okay.
And apparently spent time in opium dens in Chinatown. The FBI discovered this opium addiction, other vulnerabilities.
And they used it?
They used it. The source argues they used this information to gain leverage, effectively controlling him for nearly 25 years.
So the U.S. government had this kind of hold over Puerto Rico's first democratically elected governor. That's a huge revelation.
It is a major point in the book.
What did that mean for his policies, for the island's direction?
It meant a complete U-turn. Muñoz Marin had actually been an independentista himself earlier in his life.
Lovely.
Yes, but he abandoned that stance completely. He orchestrated the passage of the gag law. He used FBI lists, those carpetas, to prosecute not just nationalists, but also political rivals, journalists who annoyed him. Even his own wife ended up on an FBI list of suspected subversives.
His own wife?
According to the source, yes. It argues this transformed him into, essentially, a U.S. puppet.
So independence was off the table. What was the new focus?
The focus shifted entirely to Operation Bootstrap. This was an economic development program based on offering massive tax exemptions to U.S. corporations to set up shop on the island.
And did that help the average Puerto Rican?
Well, the argument in the source is that it primarily benefited the U.S. corporations and created a dependent economy, rather than fostering genuine local prosperity or independence.
Wow. Okay, so beyond political control and surveillance, the sources also talk about some really chilling public health policies. What did you find there?
This part is deeply disturbing. It really challenges any notion of purely benevolent U.S. rule. For decades, Puerto Rican women, especially in certain towns like Barceloneta, were sterilized, often without their full knowledge or proper consent. Sometimes they weren't told the procedure was irreversible.
Sterilized. How many women are we talking about?
At its peak, the source states that 1/3 of the women of childbearing age on the island had been sterilized. 1/3?
1/3. That's astronomical.
They gave Puerto Rico the highest incidence of female sterilization in the world.
Why? What was the rationale behind this?
The book links it directly to U.S. concerns about overpopulation and, more worryingly, about inferior races and the declining purity of Anglo-Saxon bloodlines. It connects explicitly to the eugenics movement that was prevalent in the U.S. at the time.
Eugenics. That has a whole other sinister layer.
It does. And it wasn't just sterilization. The sources suggest there were outright medical experiments.
Experiments.
On
people.
Yes. The book details figures like Dr. Cornelius Rhodes, His career apparently benefited significantly from work he did in Puerto Rico. Healthy prisoners in La Princesa prison were persuaded often with cartons of cigarettes as payment to take new experimental drugs for tropical diseases.
What happened to them?
When some died, their deaths were often listed simply as heart attack with no mention of the experimental drugs they were given.
That's horrifying. Was this isolated?
Apparently not. The source points to this as part of a larger pattern. The U.S. Department of Energy later acknowledged federally supported radiation experiments conducted on thousands, up to 20,000 men, women, and children between World War II and the mid-1970s.
Radiation experiments.
Yes, including, for instance, mentally disabled children who were unknowingly fed radioactive materials in their breakfast cereal for years as part of a study.
Fed radioactive material. It's hard to even comprehend.
It's a stark reminder, isn't it? How scientific pursuits can be horribly twisted within certain power structures.
Absolutely. So with all this tension, the political suppression, the economic hardship, the cultural attacks, these horrifying health policies, it feels like something had to break.
Exactly, and it did. This leads us to the October 1950 revolution.
What finally sparked this island-wide uprising?
Well, the whole colonial arrangement was just deteriorating rapidly. There had been assassination attempts on governors, police chiefs, lots of strikes. Governor Muñoz Marín kept accusing the nationalists of being communists or fascists. That, combined with the gag law basically silencing all peaceful dissent, it cornered Albizu Campos and the nationalists.
So they feel they had no other option.
That's the implication. The revolution started with a really audacious move, a mass prison break at El Oso Blanco prison. They freed 110 fugitives, including some nationalists who had apparently planned it with career criminals inside.
Why a prison break?
It seems it was a strategic move, a chess move almost, to divert police resources, scatter them across the island before the main uprisings began in the towns.
Clever. And the sources describe armed conflicts then breaking out in 8 different towns.
Yes, coordinated uprisings. And some incredibly intense, harrowing moments.
Like what?
In Peñuelas, there was this young nationalist, Guillermo González Udes. In an act of almost unbelievable defiance, he just started walking slowly towards the police line while they were firing at him. He took a fusillade of bullets, just kept walking, got within 10 feet before he finally collapsed, horrified everyone who saw it.
Wow. And Jayuya, that name comes up prominently.
Jayu is key. After a nationalist leader named Blanca Canales declared the Republic of Puerto Rico there, the U.S. response was overwhelming. They scrambled 10 P-47 Thunderbolt fighter planes. These are serious military aircraft from Rami Air Force Base.
Fighter planes against the town.
Yes, they bombed Jayuya for several hours, just leveled parts of it, left it in ruins.
Bombing their own territory.
Technically, yes. And in another town, Utuado, there were reports of National Guardsmen machine gunning captured nationalists who were already wounded and bleeding, ignoring their pleas for water. Just brutal acts.
It sounds like total war.
The book's title, War Against All Puerto Ricans, starts to feel very literal here.
And then there's this incredibly vivid story, the Battle of Salón Boricua. What happened there? Who was Vidal Santiago Diaz?
Vidal Santiago Diaz. He was a barber. His father had been a lector, someone who read books aloud to workers in cigar factories, a respected position until that industry collapsed. Vidal himself had narrowly escaped the Ponce massacre years earlier. He became a nationalist captain, trained those cadets with the wooden rifles.
And his barbershop, Salón Boricua.
It was more than just a barbershop. It was like a community hub. He secretly used it to distribute food diverted from U.S. government supplies to poor families who needed it. A lifeline.
So how did a barbershop become a battleground?
Well, on October 30th, 1950, during the uprising, Albizu Campos was trapped by police elsewhere in San Juan. Vidal suspected he'd be arrested next, so he armed himself. Had Molotov cocktails ready, an M3A1 submachine gun, a greaser gun, a serious weapon.
He decided to make a stand there.
He did. His shop became the site of a 3-hour gunfight against dozens of insular police and National Guardsmen, and incredibly, a local radio station, WIAC, broadcast the battle live.
Live on the radio?
Live on the radio. So in just 3 hours, Vidal Santiago Diaz became maybe the most famous nationalist in Puerto Rico, besides Albizu Campos himself. He was the madman spraying .45 caliber rounds, singing defiance. He had this famous quote, "If independence could be obtained with a cigarette in the mouth, I would be the first, but independence is won with a gun."
What a story. Such defiance. What happened to him after the battle? He was eventually captured.
Yes, he was captured, and what followed, according to the source, was horrific. He was taken to a place near Rami Air Force Base that prisoners called the Academy of Truth.
Academy of Truth doesn't sound good.
No. The source describes it as basically a torture factory. Vidal endured electric shocks with a magneto, a hand-crank generator,
Wow.
waterboarding, psychological torture. He said he saw another old nationalist there, a man named Lazaro, who was just a broken man from the same kind of treatment.
And he heard others.
Yes. In his cell, he heard the screams of other prisoners. He recounted a particularly gruesome story about a nationalist from Jayuya who was allegedly starved and then, well, the allegation is horrific, that he was fed his own son.
It's almost unbelievable cruelty.
It's deeply disturbing. But Vidal himself, even through all this, apparently screamed defiance at his torturers. His resilience was remarkable, but it just underscores the brutality the nationalists faced.
Which brings us to Albizu Campos's final years. The source details a really disturbing final imprisonment for him. What happened?
Albizu was held in La Princesa prison, but in this specially outfitted solitary cell. No window, no ventilation, an overflowing latrine, cut off completely.
Total isolation.
Total isolation, denied visitors, lawyers, even pens or paper. And during this time, rumors started circulating among the prisoners about a death machine, about death rays being sent through the walls of his cell.
Death rays. That sounds like paranoia. Or something from science fiction?
It does sound like that. But Albizu himself reported experiencing very strange phenomena. He described seeing ribbons of light on all the walls in all colors, brilliant as the aurora borealis.
Ribbons of light?
Yes. And he suffered severe physical symptoms. His body swelled up, he had bluish marks appear, high fever, high blood pressure, his skin became raw and started peeling. He started wrapping himself in wet towels constantly, believing it offered some protection. The guards apparently mocked him, called him the king of the towels.
Did anyone take his claims seriously or investigate?
Well, this is where it gets really chilling. Internal FBI reports from the time, which Denis cites, acknowledge that Albizu was physically incapacitated. Yet teams of government psychiatrists repeatedly declared him insane. He kept asking, pleading to be examined by a radiologist or a nuclear physicist. He was convinced they were using some kind of radiation on him, specifically to induce a stroke or a heart attack.
Believing it was deliberate.
And did. Tragically, yes. The source uncovers an internal FBI report that stunningly admits Albizu suffered a cerebral thrombosis, basically a major stroke, a brain clot, while in prison on March 27, 1956.
Okay.
And the report states he was not moved to a hospital for 2 full days after the stroke occurred.
2 days after his stroke.
2 days. He was paralyzed on his right side. He lost the ability to speak. He never spoke again, effectively silenced forever.
And connecting that back to the other radiation experiment.
Exactly. When you place Albizu's specific symptoms, his own descriptions, and the timing of his stroke within that broader context of known, documented human radiation experiments conducted by the U.S. government, it suggests a deeply, deeply troubling pattern. It raises very serious questions.
It certainly does.
Yeah.
As we pull back from this deep dive then, it's just abundantly clear that the story of Puerto Rico's struggle for independence is profoundly complex. It's marked by incredible sacrifice, but also systematic control, and yet amazing individual heroism.
Absolutely. From imposing a language to using those insidious carpetas for surveillance and control, maybe even alleged medical torture, the sources reveal this consistent pattern, a pattern where the stated ideals of American democracy, liberty and justice for all, often seemed completely at odds with its actual actions in Puerto Rico.
Yeah.
And if you connect this to the bigger picture, the experiences described in the book, Puerto Rico's Experience, figures like Albizu Campos, Vidal Santiago Diaz, they really throw a spotlight on these deeper, maybe uncomfortable fault lines in the American character.
All lines, like what's...
Like the contradictions between saying all men are created equal and a history that includes documented racial superiority, economic exploitation, even supporting authoritarian regimes abroad when it suited U.S. interests. Like Smedley D. Butler, the famous Marine general, later argued when he called war a racket. These sources echo some of those critiques.
So what does this all mean for you, the listener, today, thinking about this deep dive?
Yeah, what's the takeaway?
Maybe the ultimate takeaway is about questioning narratives. In a world just saturated with information, how do we figure out the true stories from the, let's call them convenient narratives, the ones established powers might want us to believe?
That's a huge question.
It is. And maybe even more importantly, how do we ensure that these voices, the ones that the source says have been unheard for 100 years, finally get their due? How do we make sure those stories are heard and acknowledged?
A crucial question to leave people thinking about.